That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The sun hung low over Fort Bragg, casting long shadows across the dew-slicked parade ground. Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood at attention in her camouflage utilities, her boots planted firm on the packed earth. The air carried the sharp tang of wet grass and gun oil, mingling with the distant rumble of Humvees on the access road. Around her, the K9 unit formed precise ranks, handlers and their partners, a line of German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois sitting stock-still, ears pricked, tails tucked in disciplined silence. Rex, Elena's Malinois, pressed close to her left leg, his black and tan coat still damp from the night's humidity. She could feel the warmth of his body through her pant leg, a steady anchor in the rigid formation. "Platoon, attention!" Captain Harlan's voice cracked like a rifle shot across the field. He paced the front, his polished boots kicking up faint puffs of dust. At 42, Harlan was a lifer, broad-shouldered, with a jaw set like granite and eyes that scanned for the slightest lapse. The unit snapped to, heels together, chins up, salutes crisp. Elena's hand rose in unison, her fingers brushing the brim of her patrol cap. She'd been with the 82nd Airborne's K9 detachment for 8 years, rising through the ranks on quiet competence. Rex had been her shadow for 5 of them, bonded in the chaos of deployments to dusty outposts in Afghanistan. Their partnership wasn't just protocol. It was trust forged in the scent of explosives and the whisper of incoming fire. The morning's drill was standard, explosive detection sweeps in a mock village setup on the edge of the training area. Chain of command was clear. Handlers followed the lead dog, reported anomalies up the line, no deviations. Harlan emphasized it during the briefing in the low-slung barracks, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as coffee steamed in dented mugs. "We detect, we mark, we call it in," he'd said, his gaze lingering on the newer handlers. "No heroics. The mission stays clean." Eleanor nodded along, her hand absently stroking Rex's flank under the table. She knew the rules by heart, but something in Harlan's tone that day felt off, sharper, as if the routine hid an undercurrent. They moved out in formation, the dogs on short leashes, muzzles gleaming under the rising sun. The mock village rose ahead, plywood huts clustered around a central square littered with simulated debris, tires, crates, burlap sacks stuffed with inert materials. Radio chatter filled the air, static-laced voices confirming positions. Alpha team in place, Tango 1 sweeping east flank. Eleanor's heart rate steadied to the rhythm of the march, her focus narrowing to Rex's subtle cues, the twitch of his nose, the slight tension in his lead. It started small, as these things often did. They were midway through the sweep when Rex halted abruptly at the corner of a hut, his body going rigid. Eleanor knelt, her gloved hand on his harness. "Such," she murmured, "the alert command they drilled 1,000 times." Rex pawed the ground, whining low, his eyes fixed on a rusted drainage pipe half buried in the dirt. The scent hit her then, faint but unmistakable. Not the training simulant, but something real, acrid, like chemical residue carried on the wind. "Contact," she reported into her radio, voice level. "Possible anomaly at grid 7. Rex has a hit." The team paused, handlers fanning out while the lead dog circled back. But Harlan was there in seconds, striding over with his radio man in tow. Up close, his face was flushed, sweat beading on his brow despite the cool morning. "Negative, Vasquez," he snapped, eyes flicking to the pipe. "False positive. Resume sweep." Elena hesitated, her grip tightening on Rex's leash. The dog didn't budge, whining again, insistent. She'd seen him like this before, in the Hindu Kush, when he'd sniffed out an IED that saved a convoy. "Sir, Rex is locked on. Permission to investigate." Harlan's jaw clenched. "I said negative, Sergeant. We're on a timeline. Move out!" His voice carried an edge, not just command, but something personal, irritation laced with evasion. Around them, the other handlers shifted, exchanging glances. Private Ruiz, Elena's junior partner with his Labrador, Mira, whispered over the radio, "Sarge, he's not letting up." The chain of command weighed heavy. An invisible line etched into every briefing, every after-action report. Obey or risk the repercussions, demerits, sidelining, questions about judgment. But Rex's loyalty pulled at her, his trust in her decisions mirroring her own in him. Elena's pulse quickened, the desert wind from memory stirring in her mind, carrying echoes of past calls that had kept her alive. She straightened, meeting Harlan's gaze. "With respect, Captain, Rex doesn't false on this. If it's nothing, we'll clear it in 30 seconds. But if it's not—" The words hung, a quiet defiance in the formal cadence. The team froze, boots silent on the earth, the hum of a distant Black Hawk underscoring the tension. Harlan's eyes narrowed, calculating. The pipe lay there, innocuous to the untrained eye. But Elena knew better. Years of patrols had honed her instincts, the bond with Rex amplifying what protocols sometimes missed. He stepped closer, voice low. "You're questioning orders in front of the unit, Vasquez. That's a line." "I'm following my handler's read, sir," she replied, steady, "and Rex's knows." For a beat, the parade ground held its breath, the creak of leather, the soft pant of dogs, the faint crackle of radios waiting for the next call. Harlan exhaled sharply, then nodded once. "Fine. Dig it. But if this wastes time, it's on you." Eleanor signaled Rex forward, her hands steady as she uncovered the pipe. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a small cache, not training aids but unauthorized fireworks, laced with real black powder. Sabotage. Or worse, someone testing the limits, perhaps a disgruntled contractor or insider grudge. Harlan's face paled as the find was logged, the incident chain kicking into gear with a terse radio burst to base command. By midday, the investigation tent buzzed with MPs and brass, the air thick with the scent of instant coffee and paperwork. Eleanor stood outside, Rex at her side, his head resting against her knee. She'd crossed the line, but in doing so exposed a breach that could have escalated. Whispers rippled through the unit, about Harlan's haste, about the pipe's origin tied to supply discrepancies he'd overlooked. That act of quiet insistence marked the beginning. It rippled upward, questioning not just the drill, but the routines that hid deeper fractures in the chain. Elena didn't seek credit, she sought clarity. But in the rigid world of ranks and reports, clarity often came at a cost, one that would echo far beyond the base, into lives she hadn't yet imagined touching. The investigation tent at Fort Bragg hummed with the low murmur of voices, the kind that carried the weight of impending reports. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting stark shadows on the canvas walls, while the scent of stale coffee and printer ink hung heavy in the air. Sergeant Elena Vasquez sat on a folding chair outside, her utilities still dusted with the morning's dirt. Rex curled at her feet with his muzzle on his paws. The dog's steady breathing was a counterpoint to the chaos inside. MPs shuffling papers, Captain Harlan's clipped responses to questions, the occasional bark of a radio demanding updates from supply chain. Elena ran a gloved hand along Rex's ear, feeling the soft velvet texture that grounded her amid the uncertainty. They'd been partners long enough that his presence was more than companionship. It was a silent affirmation of instincts over edicts. The find in the pipe had triggered protocols she'd seen before, interviews, logs, the slow grind of accountability, but this felt different. Harlan's evasion during the drill lingered in her mind, a crack in the command structure she'd always trusted as unyielding. "Vasquez!" a voice called from the tent flap. It was Major Ellis, the detachment commander. A wiry man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses and a reputation for fairness tempered by procedure. He gestured her inside, his face etched with the fatigue of endless briefings. Elena rose, Rex following at heel without command, his nails clicking softly on the gravel. "At ease," Ellis said as she entered, saluting first. The tent was cramped. A folding table piled with photos of the pipe's contents, notebooks open to sketches of the mock village layout, and Harlan, standing rigid in the corner, arms crossed. "Sergeant, walk us through it again," Ellis prompted, his pen poised over a clipboard. His tone was neutral, procedural, no accusation, but the undercurrent of scrutiny was clear. Elena recounted the sweep, the team's formation, Rex's alert, Harlan's initial dismissal. She kept her voice even, facts marching like soldiers in review, the whine in Rex's throat, the acrid whiff she'd caught, the captain's flushed insistence to move on. Rex sat beside her, alert but calm, his dark eyes scanning the room as if sensing the tension in the air. Harlan shifted, his boots scraping the canvas floor. "Sir, it was a judgment call. Training timelines are tight. False positives waste resources." His words were measured, but Elena caught the flicker in his jaw, the way his gaze avoided the evidence photos. The black powder wasn't just contraband. It traced back to a shipment discrepancy in the quartermaster logs, one Harlan had signed off on weeks prior. Whispers among the handlers suggested he'd rushed inspections to meet metrics, turning a blind eye to red flags. Ellis nodded, jotting notes. "And your response, Sergeant?" "You pressed the issue in front of the platoon." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor felt the weight of it, the line between initiative and insubordination. She met his eyes steadily. "Sir, Rex's red is reliable. 98% accuracy in the field, per our last eval. Ignoring it risked the team's safety even in training." Rex leaned into her leg then, a subtle press that spoke volumes. The major glanced down at the dog, a faint acknowledgement in his expression. K9 units weren't just tools, they were extensions of the handler, their bonds documented in psych evals and bonding protocols. The interview stretched, questions probing deeper. Had she noticed irregularities before? Any personal friction with the captain? Elena answered truthfully. Nothing overt, just the accumulating sense of corners cut under pressure. Harlan interjected once, defending the chain. "Discipline maintains order, Major. Questioning in the field erodes it." But Ellis held up a hand, his focus on Elena. "And loyalty to your partner? How does that factor?" She paused, the words forming carefully. "It's the foundation, sir. Rex doesn't question. He detects. My duty is to trust that and report up the line." The tent fell quiet, save for the distant thump of a helicopter lifting off from the helipad, rotors slicing the afternoon heat. Ellis closed his notebook. "Dismissed. We'll reconvene with brass tomorrow. Keep this contained. No unit gossip." Outside, the sun beat down, turning the gravel into a shimmering haze. Elena led Rex to the kennel block, a row of concrete runs shaded by camouflage netting. The other handlers were there, washing down their dogs with hoses, water sluicing over fur in rhythmic streams. Private Ruiz approached, Mira shaking droplets from her coat nearby. "Sarge, you okay? That was some balls, resolve back there." He corrected himself, voice low, respectful. Elena nodded, filling Rex's bowl from a spigot, the cool water splashing against metal. "Just doing the job, Ruiz. Rex did the heavy lifting." But inside, the moral tension coiled tighter. Defying Harlan had exposed a vulnerability in the system, one where efficiency trumped vigilance, but it also painted a target on her back. Rumors could sideline her, reassess her fitness for deployment. Yet the alternative, silencing Rex's alert, echoed the ghosts of past missions where overlooked signs had cost lives. That evening, as the base settled into twilight, The floodlights humming to life along the perimeter, Elena reviewed the after-action log in the handler's ready room. The space was sparse. Metal lockers, a whiteboard scrawled with patrol rotations, the faint scent of kibble and leather. Rex lay under the table, chewing a rubber Kong, while she pored over the entries. Harlan's sign-off on the faulty shipment stared back, a discrepancy now under audit. Her act had rippled, prompting a full supply review, quiet reform stirring in the bureaucracy. A knock at the door pulled her from the page. It was Ellis, alone this time, his uniform jacket slung over one arm. "Vasquez, a word." He stepped in, glancing at Rex before sitting across from her. "The captain's explaining himself upstairs. Your report checks out. Clean, detailed, but this could go higher. IG might get involved." His eyes held hers, assessing. "You stood your ground today. Not many do without cracking." Elena straightened, the chair creaking under her. "Had to, sir. For the unit. For what we stand for." Ellis leaned back, the lines around his eyes softening fractionally. "That's the crux. Duty's a chain, but conscience is the link that holds when it strains." He rose, pausing at the door. "Keep Rex sharp. We'll need that nose and your judgment before this settles." As he left, the door clicking shut, Eleanor felt the weight settle deeper. The incident wasn't just about powder in a pipe. It was a test of the bonds that defined them. Handler to dog, soldier to command, individual to institution. Rex looked up, tilting his head, as if understanding the unspoken. She scratched his ruff, the gesture a promise amid the gathering shadows. Little did she know, this defiance would echo beyond the base's wire, touching lives in ways that would force her to confront the full cost of integrity years down the line. The days following the incident blurred into a haze of protocols and sidelong glances at Fort Bragg. Sergeant Elena Vasquez moved through her routines with mechanical precision. Morning PT under the grey dawn sky, the slap of boots on the track syncing with the cadence calls echoing off the barracks. Rex trotted beside her, his harness jingling faintly, a constant in the shifting undercurrents of the base. The investigation had escalated quietly, MPs combing through quartermaster records in the dim glow of computer screens, while Harlan was temporarily relieved of field duties, his office door sealed with a terse memo. Elena felt the eyes on her during the unit's afternoon drills, handlers pairing off for obedience exercises, dogs heeling in tight circles on the dusty range. The air smelled of sun-baked earth and the metallic tang of training dummies, but the camaraderie had frayed. Private Ruiz kept his distance, focusing on Mira's recalls with exaggerated focus, while others murmured in the kennel shadows about stirring the pot. She didn't regret the stand. Rex's alert had uncovered not just contraband, but a pattern of overlooked inspections that could have compromised real ops. Yet the moral weight pressed in, loyalty to the chain meant unity, and her defiance had introduced doubt. That afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the pine fringes, Eleanor received the summons to Major Ellis's office. The building was a squat concrete bunker, its corridors lined with framed citations and the faint hum of air handlers. She reported in, saluting at the door, Rex sitting precisely at her heel. Ellis looked up from his desk, cluttered with after-action reports and a steaming mug of black coffee. "Vasquez, take a seat. Rex too, good boy." The dog's ears perked at the praise, but he remained vigilant, sensing the room's subdued tension. Ellis leaned forward, his glasses reflecting the overhead light. "The IG's briefing wrapped this morning. Harlan's discrepancies check out. Rush sign-offs on 3 shipments, including that powder. No malice, they say, just pressure from higher up to hit deployment quotas." He paused, tapping a pen against the desk, the rhythm steady like a metronome. "But your intervention flagged it early. Saved potential headaches downrange." Elena nodded, her hands folded in her lap, the fabric of her utilities whispering against the chair. Praise in the military came wrapped in procedure. It was acknowledgement, not absolution. "Sir, it was Rex's call," she said evenly, glancing at the dog. His flank rose and fell in calm breaths, but she knew he'd picked up on her unease. The subtle shift in her posture during the drill, Ellis's expression softened fractionally, a rare crack in the command facade. "Modesty's fine, Sergeant, but credit where it's due. Handlers like you keep the unit sharp. That said." He slid a folder across the desk. "Harlan's pushing back. Claims your field challenge undermined authority. Recommends a formal counseling for you. Insubordination in training." The words landed like a suppressed round, quiet but impactful. Elena's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "Understood, sir. I followed protocol. Report the anomaly. Request verification." Ellis held her gaze, the silence stretching, broken only by the distant rumble of a supply truck on the access road. "I know, and I'll back your report, but this ripples. Brass wants examples, discipline or reform." He closed the folder, the snap echoing. "Stand by for the board. In the meantime, double-check those logs. Eyes are on us now." Dismissed, Elena led Rex out into the late light, the base's floodlights flickering on early against the encroaching dusk. The counseling loomed like a shadow over her record, could stall promotions, reassess her for high-risk deployments. Yet beneath it, a quiet resolve stirred. The incident had prompted a unit-wide audit, handlers now cross-verifying shipments with fresh scrutiny. Ruiz caught up to her near the kennels, his face flushed from a run. "Heard about the board, Sarge? Mira and I got your back. Witness statements if needed." His Labrador nudged Elena's hand, wet nose cool against her skin, a gesture of solidarity in the handler's unspoken code. She managed a nod, filling Rex's water dish under the spigot, the stream gurgling into the metal. "Appreciate it. Just keep the dogs tight." As twilight deepened, the base hummed with evening routines. Mess hall chatter filtering through open windows, the soft whir of generators powering the perimeter lights. Elena settled in the ready room, reviewing certification manuals under the harsh fluorescence. Rex sprawled nearby with his head on her boot. The bond between them felt amplified now, his trust a mirror to the loyalty she owed the unit, even when it strained against orders. Word of the audit spread subtly, like radio static building before a transmission. During the next morning's briefing, Ellis addressed the platoon in the open bay of the barracks, the air thick with the scent of polished boots and fresh brewed coffee. "We've tightened protocols, no more shortcuts. Vasquez's team led the way. Learn from it." Harlan wasn't present, his absence a void that handlers filled with quiet efficiency. Elena stood in formation, Rex at her side, feeling the shift, not just compliance, but a renewed vigilance rippling through the ranks. But the personal cost emerged in quieter moments. That evening, as she walked Rex along the wooded trail behind the kennels, the pine needles crunching underfoot, a call came over her cell, civilian line, rare during duty hours. It was her sister, voice tight from back home in Texas. "Elena, Mom's asking about your next leave. And there's talk in the old neighborhood about some ceremony at the high school, Veterans Day thing. You going?" Eleanor's steps faltered, the phone warm against her ear. The school, where her father had coached before his passing, where she'd grown up saluting flags on game days. She'd avoided those events since deploying, the pomp too distant from the grit of patrols. "Not this year," she replied, watching Rex sniff the underbrush, his tail low. The conversation shifted to family updates, but the mention lingered, a faint echo of legacies beyond the wire. Little did she know. Threads from her service were weaving into civilian lives, connections waiting to surface years later, when a single whisper would bridge the gap between duty's silence and its profound reach. By week's end, the counseling board convened in a stark conference room, walls lined with regimental flags that hung motionless in the conditioned air. Elena faced the panel, Ellis presiding, flanked by two colonels whose stars gleamed under the lights. Harlan testified first, his uniform impeccable, voice measured. Sergeant Vasquez's actions, while well-intentioned, set a precedent. Orders must hold, or the chain phrase. Elena followed, recounting the drill with Rex's cues, her report backed by timestamps and witness logs. Rex waited outside, but his influence permeated her words, the dog's unerring instinct as the linchpin. The colonels deliberated in murmurs, papers rustling like dry leaves. When they reconvened, the senior officer cleared his throat. No formal reprimand, initiative noted as a positive, but tread carefully, Sergeant. Conscience serves, but command endures. Relief washed through her, tempered by the warning's edge. As she saluted and exited, the base's night sounds enveloped her. Crickets in the grass, the low growl of patrols on the perimeter. Reform took root subtly, a new checklist for sweeps, handler input waited in briefings. Elena's stand had sparked it, her integrity a quiet catalyst. Yet the moral tension lingered, a reminder that in rigid systems every choice echoed, shaping not just careers, but the invisible bonds that tied soldiers to the world beyond. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. Months passed at Fort Bragg, like the steady turnover of patrol rotations, each day etched with the grind of maintenance and the quiet vigilance that defined the K-9 unit. Sergeant Elena Vasquez adapted to the new protocol she'd helped forge, mandatory dual verifications on shipments, handlers logging scent anomalies in real time via encrypted apps. Rex remained her constant, his sleek form cutting through morning fog during scent trails in the pine-shrouded training fields, where the air carried the crisp bite of dew and distant wood smoke from the mess hall. The board's decision had cleared her record, but the undercurrent of scrutiny lingered, a subtle shift in how Captain Harlan, reinstated but demoted to logistics oversight, nodded at her in passing, his salutes clipped and formal. Elena's days blurred into a rhythm of discipline, dawn runs, where her boots pounded the gravel path, syncing with Rex's loping gait, afternoons in the kennel block, grooming his coat with a curry comb that rasped softly against the bristles, the ritual a meditation amid the echoing barks of other dogs. The reform had strengthened the unit, fewer oversights, sharper responses, but it came at a personal toll. Whispers in the ready room about the Vasquez play faded, yet she felt isolated, her initiative a double-edged blade that earned respect from peers like Ruiz, while drawing wary glances from command. Loyalty to Rex anchored her. His unwavering focus during drills reminded her that true bonds didn't fracture under pressure. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves skittered across the parade ground under a steel-grey sky, Major Ellis pulled her aside after the platoon briefing. The barracks smelled of fresh paint from recent renovations, the fluorescent hum underscoring his words. "Vasquez, you've got a slot opening for the joint exercise at Camp Lejeune. K-9 integration with Marine EOD. Lead handler." His tone was matter-of-fact, eyes appraising behind his glasses. It was a step up, a chance to prove the incident hadn't dulled her edge. But Elena sensed the test beneath it. "Rex and I are ready, sir," she replied, saluting crisply. Inside, the assignment stirred unease. Lejeune meant exposure to higher brass, where one misstep could revive old questions. The convoy rolled out at dawn 2 days later, Humvees rumbling down I-95 under a convoy of low clouds, the diesel exhaust mingling with the faint scent of kibble crates in the back. Elena rode shotgun in the lead vehicle, Rex harnessed beside her, his head out the window, ears flapping in the wind. Private Ruiz followed in the trailing truck with Mira, their radio chatter a steady patter, all clear at mile marker 42. The exercise was routine, simulated urban sweeps in a mock cityscape of shipping containers and chain-link barriers. but protocols demanded precision, especially after Bragg's audit had made headlines in internal memos. At Lejeune, the base sprawled under salt-tanged air from the nearby coast, the crash of waves audible during lulls in activity. Eleanor's team integrated seamlessly, Rex leading the first sweep through a derelict warehouse setup, his nose working the air currents laced with sea brine and simulated ordnance. Handlers fanned out in fire team formations, vests heavy with gear, the clink of carabiners punctuating their steps. Clear left, Ruiz called, Mira marking a dummy cache with a sit. Elena's focus narrowed to Rex's cues, the subtle freeze, the paw tap, as they cleared a shadowed corner stacked with crates. Then it happened again, an echo of that fateful drill. Rex locked onto a pallet of inert materials, whining low, his body taut against the leash. Eleanor knelt, gloved hand steadying him. "Such, boy." The scent was off. Not the standard simulant, but something sharper, like degraded fuel residue. She radioed it in. "Anomaly at Sector 3. Request verify." The Marine EOD lead, a grizzled gunnery sergeant named Torres, approached with his team, their boots crunching on the gravel-strewn floor. "What's the read, Sergeant?" he asked, voice gravelly from years of salt air. "Rex is insistent, Gunny, not a false." Elena's words were calm, but her pulse quickened, memories of Harlan's dismissal flashing. Torres nodded, signaling his techs to probe. Minutes later, they uncovered a hairline crack in a training barrel, leaking trace chemicals from improper storage, a hazard that could have tainted the entire site. "Good catch," Torres grunted, logging it with a tablet stylus. "Your dog's nose just saved us a hazmat nightmare." The team paused for decon, handlers hosing down gear under portable showers, water sheeting off Rex's fur in rivulets that steamed in the chill. Word spread through the exercise channels, Eleanor's intervention noted in the daily sitrep. That evening, around a folding table in the transient billeting, Torres raised a plastic cup of coffee in salute. "Handlers like you keep the edge, Vasquez. Commands all metrics. Dogs don't lie." Ruiz chuckled softly nearby, Mira dozing at his feet, but Elena felt the weight of the praise, another ripple, another quiet defiance of the move-on mentality. Yet as stars pricked the Carolina sky, visible through the tent flaps, doubt crept in. Her instincts, amplified by Rex, challenged the system repeatedly. How long before it pushed back harder? Back at Bragg by week's end, the Lejeune report bolstered her file. Ellis mentioning it during a routine eval in his office, the space warmed by a space heater against the fall bite. "You're building a record, Sergeant, but pace it. Reform's incremental." He handed her a commendation form, the paper crisp under her fingers. Elena nodded, Rex sitting alert beside the desk, his tail thumping once in approval. The bond with him felt unbreakable, a loyalty that transcended ranks, yet it highlighted her growing isolation from the chain's rigid flow. Personal life intruded subtly, like radio static in a clear transmission. Letters from home piled up in her locker, updates from her sister about the Texas town, mentions of the high school, where their father had once stood on the sidelines, whistle in hand. The annual Veterans Ceremony loomed in Elena's mind. She'd skipped it for years. Deployments and duty pulling her away, the civilian pomp feeling hollow against the raw edges of service. "You should come," her sister wrote in one, the ink smudged slightly. "Kids look up to folks like you." Elena folded the letter away, focusing instead on Rex's evening patrol. The base's perimeter lights casting long shadows on the wire. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rumbled over the pines, a visitor arrived at the kennel gate, an older man in a faded army jacket, hat tucked under his arm. He introduced himself as retired Sergeant Major Hale, eyes sharp despite the lines of age. "Heard about your work from an old Lejeune contact," he said, voice steady as he scratched Rex's chin, the dog accepting the gesture with wary trust. They talked in the covered run, rain pattering on the tin roof, Hale sharing stories of K9 units in Vietnam, handlers who'd bent rules to save lives, their legacies whispered in VFW halls. Integrity costs, Vasquez, but it echoes. Don't avoid the mirrors it holds up. His words lingered as Elena walked Rex that night, puddles reflecting the floodlights in fractured gleams. The moral tension coiled anew. Her actions reformed units, but distanced her from the comforts of unquestioned obedience. Rex pressed against her leg, sensing the unrest, his warmth a reminder of the purest loyalty. Unbeknownst to her, those echoes were already reaching outward, threading through civilian lives, waiting for a moment years hence when a young girl's whisper would illuminate the profound reach of one handler's quiet courage. Winter deepened its grip on Fort Bragg, turning the training fields into a mosaic of frost-laced pines and mud-churned paths that clung to boot treads like reluctant memories. Sergeant Elena Vasquez led her morning patrol with Rex, the pair cutting through the chill under a sky heavy with the promise of snow. The air bit sharp, carrying the clean scent of frozen earth and the faint, oily residue from last night's vehicle maintenance in the motor pool. Rex's breath puffed invisible clouds, his paws silent on the leaf-strewn trail, while Elena's patrol cap brim collected tiny ice crystals that melted against her skin. 8 years in the K9 unit had honed this routine to instinct. Checkpoints logged, anomalies noted, but the weight of recent reforms pressed on her like the rucksack she carried during extended drills. The Lejeune exercise had solidified her standing, earning a quiet commendation in the unit newsletter. Its pages distributed during morning formations with the smell of fresh ink mingling with dew-damp uniforms. Major Ellis had pulled her aside again, this time in the dim light of the ops center, maps pinned to walls under the steady tick of wall clocks. Vasquez, you're up for instructor certification, K9 Handler School at Lackland. Share what you've learned. His voice held the measured approval of command, eyes flicking to Rex, who sat alert by the door, his harness gleaming under the fluorescence. It was an honor, a chance to mentor, but Elena felt the undercurrent. Her interventions had marked her as a voice for vigilance, one that could either elevate or isolate. She accepted with a crisp salute, the leather of her glove creaking softly. Thank you, sir. Rex and I will prep the materials. Back in the kennel block, she reviewed the curriculum under the harsh glow of hanging bulbs, the space echoing with the rhythmic scrape of brushes on fur from adjacent runs. Rex lay nearby, gnawing a frozen chew toy, his jaws working methodically. The certification meant weeks away, drilling new handlers on bond-building protocols and scent discrimination, the subtle cues that separated routine from risk. Yet as she outlined lesson plans, the moral tension resurfaced. Teaching meant imparting not just technique, but the quiet courage to question when instincts clashed with orders. Harlan's shadow loomed in her mind, his reassignment to admin a reminder that reform came slowly, often at personal expense. Preparations accelerated with the base's winter cycle, handlers bundling in ECWCS layers for cold weather simulations in the wooded impact areas. Elena's team ran obedience circuits under overcast skies, dogs quartering through underbrush heavy with hoarfrost, their alerts marked by flags that snapped in the wind. Private Ruiz, now her unofficial second, coordinated the rotations, Mira's bay echoing as she hit on a buried simulant. "Solid work, team," Elena called during debrief, her voice carrying over the crackle of portable radios. The group nodded, steam rising from their breaths, but she caught the deference in their eyes, respect earned through her stands, yet tinged with caution. Loyalty flowed both ways in the unit, from handler to dog and back, but extending it upward required trust that recent fractures had tested. The summons to deploy came mid-February, a terse order from Battalion HQ, K9 support for a joint task force in the Middle East, rotating into a forward operating base in Syria's border regions. Elena packed with efficiency, Rex's travel crate secured in the hangar, his medical records updated under the hum of dehumidifiers. The flight out was a blur of C-130 vibrations and the low whine of engines. Rex sedated lightly in his compartment, while Elena reviewed mission briefs in the jump seat, the air thick with jet fuel and recycled oxygen. Upon landing at Al-Tanf, the base sprawled under relentless sun, dust devils swirling across the tarmac as they offloaded into the heat-shimmering haze. The scent hit first, arid sand mixed with diesel exhaust and the faint metallic tang of distant artillery. Integration was procedural. Briefings in a tent ringed by HESCO barriers, the canvas walls fluttering in gusts that carried whispers of Arabic from local interpreters. Eleanor's role: explosive detection for convoy routes, partnering with EOD teams on patrols through Wadi-scarred terrain. Rex adapted swiftly, his nose sifting the dry air for threats amid the thorny scrub and abandoned vehicles that dotted the landscape. Days blurred into nights under starlit skies, the base's generators thrumming like a heartbeat. "Sweep clear to checkpoint Bravo," she'd report into her radio. Voice steady over the static, Rex's lead taut as he quartered ahead. The bond with him sharpened here, his alerts not just protocol, but lifelines in a theater where oversights echoed the Bragg incident on a lethal scale. It was during a routine escort, third week in, that the dilemma resurfaced. The convoy snaked through a narrow pass, Humvees kicking up ochre dust that coated windshields and tongues alike. Rex, riding in the open bed of Elena's vehicle, suddenly stiffened, whining low against the roar of tires on gravel. Elena signaled the driver to halt, dismounting with her M4 slung, the weight familiar across her chest. "Anomaly ahead, 200 meters, she transmitted, kneeling to let Rex work the ground. The dog pawed insistently at a cluster of rocks, his body language screaming hit, possible IED or worse, a booby-trapped cache from insurgent remnants. The convoy commander, a lieutenant from the 101st, approached on foot, his helmet casting a shadow in the midday glare. "Vasquez, we've got civilians in the village ahead, kids waving from the ridge, timeline's tight, brass wants us pushing." His tone was edged with urgency, eyes scanning the horizon where distant figures watched. Elena's grip tightened on the leash, Rex unmoving, his ears pinned back. Memories of Harlan's dismissal flooded in, the cost of rushing, the lives hung on split decisions. "Sir, Rex is locked. We clear it or we risk the whole line." The lieutenant hesitated, radio crackling with Hire's impatience, the sun baking the sand into a furnace. Around them, the team held position, engines idling with throaty rumbles, gunners scanning perimeters. Eleanor met the LT's gaze, her voice level but firm. "Permission to probe, sir. 30 seconds." The air hung thick, broken only by the faint cry of a hawk overhead and Rex's persistent whine. The lieutenant exhaled, nodding once. "Do it, but make it count." EOD moved in, probes clicking against stone, uncovering a pressure plate device, crude but effective, wired to a buried explosive that could have shredded the lead vehicle. The disposal team worked methodically, the sharp crack of controlled detonation echoing off the cliffs minutes later, sending a plume of dust skyward. Debrief back at base was subdued. Held in the ops tent under swaying lights, the scent of MRE packets lingering. The LT clasped her shoulder briefly, a rare gesture. "Good call, Sergeant. That was no training sim." Elena nodded, scratching Rex's ruff as he lapped water from a collapsible bowl, the cool liquid splashing softly. Word filtered up the chain, her report filed with timestamps and GPS pings. Another ripple of vigilance in a theater hungry for it, yet the isolation deepened, Peers nodded approval during chow lines, but Command's eyes lingered, weighing her instincts against the need for seamless ops. Nights in the hooch were quiet, the cot's canvas creaking under her as she journaled by headlamp. Rex curled at her feet, his warmth seeping through the thin blanket. Letters from home arrived sporadically, postmarked with Texas stamps. Her sister's updates on the high school, the upcoming spring ceremony honoring veterans. "Dad would want you there," one read, the words blurring in the dim light. Elena had skipped them all, the civilian rituals feeling distant from the sand and sweat of deployment, her focus locked on the mission's moral tightrope. Rex stirred, sensing her unrest, his nose nudging her hand, a silent reminder of loyalties that bridged worlds. Rotation ended in late spring, the C-130 lifting off with the base shrinking below, a patchwork of dust and determination. Back at Bragg, Eleanor reintegrated seamlessly, but the Syria stand lingered in evals, bolstering her instructor slot. Hale's words echoed during certification prep. Integrity's cost, its reach. As she drilled rookies on alert responses in the summer heat, sweat beading under her cap, the moral arc of her service curved toward an unseen horizon, one where her quiet defiances would touch civilian shores, years later, in a whisper that redefined legacy. Years slipped by at Fort Bragg like the slow drift of pine needles on autumn winds, marking the passage of seasons in the unyielding cadence of military life. Sergeant Elena Vasquez, now staff sergeant after a promotion earned through the quiet accumulation of commendations, moved through her duties with the same measured resolve. Rex, greying at the muzzle but no less sharp, remained her steadfast partner. His paws padding softly beside her during dawn patrols along the base's fog-shrouded trails. The air carried the familiar chill of early mornings, laced with the scent of damp earth and distant diesel from the motor pool, a world where routines had hardened into legacy. The reforms sparked by her early stands had taken root across the K-9 program, mandatory handler briefings on instinct overrides, integrated audits that wove K-9 alerts into operational doctrine. Elena had completed her instructor certification at Lackland, standing before rows of green recruits in the sun-baked yards, her voice steady as she demonstrated Rex's precision on scent lines strung between wooden posts. "Trust the bond," she'd say, her gloved hand signaling the dog forward, his nose questing through the heat haze. "It's not defiance, it's the chain's strongest link." The rookies nodded, notebooks open under the relentless Texas sun, but Elena felt the echo of her own trials in their wide eyes, the moral tightrope of obedience versus the pull of conscience. Back at Bragg, she mentored a new generation. Private Ruiz, now a sergeant under her, Mira retired to a handler's family farm, but her spirit alive in the unit's drills. Harlan had faded into administrative obscurity, his career a cautionary footnote in supply chain memos. Yet Elena's isolation persisted, a subtle undercurrent in the salutes and briefings. Peers respected her, but command viewed her through a lens of calculated caution, her file thick with incident reports turned to assets, yet shadowed by the whispers of those who'd bent rules to fit metrics. Nights in her quarters were quiet, the hum of the barracks fan mingling with Rex's soft snores on his mat, letters from home stacked unread on the dresser. Her sister's pleas for the high school ceremony in Texas grew annual, the event a ritual of flags and speeches honoring local veterans, but Eleanor demurred each time, deployments and evals pulling her deeper into the service's embrace. The call to action came in the fall of her 10th year, a classified rotation to support counter-IED ops in Iraq's Anbar province. The C-17 flight was a vibration-filled limbo, Elena reviewing SAT imagery on a tablet while Rex rested in his crate, the hold's air thick with hydraulic fluid and the low murmur of loading crews. Al-Assad Air Base greeted them with blistering heat. the tarmac rippling under a sky devoid of clouds, dust coating everything in a fine ochre film. Integration was swift. Briefings in air-conditioned trailers where maps glowed on screens, the scent of cooling vents battling the pervasive grit. Elena's team, a mix of handlers and EOD techs, patrolled reconstruction sites. Rex leading sweeps through villages scarred by years of conflict, his alerts guiding probes into rubble-strewn streets. It was on the fourth patrol, threading a market route flanked by date palms heavy with fruit, that the dilemma crystallized. The convoy halted at a checkpoint, locals milling with baskets of bread and spices, the air rich with cumin and engine exhaust. Rex, harnessed in the lead vehicle, reacted first, his body stiffening against the leash as Elena opened the door, his whine cutting through the chatter. She dismounted, boots sinking into sun-baked soil, and let him quarter the berm. "Such," she commanded softly, her eyes scanning the crowd where children played near a stalled truck. The dog locked on a tire stack, pawing insistently, his tail low, a hit, sharp and unyielding. The platoon leader, Captain Reyes, approached from the command Humvee, his face shadowed under his Kevlar. "Vasquez. We've got a medical evac incoming. Wounded contractor 5 clicks out. Hires pushing us to clear and move." His radio crackled with urgency, voices overlapping in clipped bursts. Elena knelt beside Rex, feeling the dog's tension through the lead, the moral pull as stark as the desert horizon. Memories of Syria flooded back, the lieutenant's hesitation, the detonation's plume. But here, civilians pressed close, eyes curious and wary. Ignoring the alert meant risking the route, endangering not just the convoy, but the fragile trust with locals who'd seen too much loss. "Sir, Rex is solid. We verify or we don't proceed." Her voice was even, gloved hand steady on the harness, but her pulse thrummed against her temples. Reyes glanced at the villagers, a boy no older than 10, waving tentatively, then back to her. "Timeline's compressing. If it's nothing—" The words trailed, the weight of command evident in his stance. Around them, the team held, gunners vigilant, the market's hum pausing as if sensing the standoff. Elena met his gaze, the sun glinting off her shades. "It's never nothing with him, Captain. 30 seconds to probe." Reyes exhaled, signaling EOD forward with a terse nod. The techs worked methodically, detectors beeping over the tires, uncovering a concealed device, cell phone triggered, hidden in a false compartment, likely placed to disrupt aid flows. The disposal was controlled, a muffled thud sending a dust cloud skyward, locals scattering with muffled cries. Reyes clasped her arm briefly as they remounted. "Oh, you won, Staff Sergeant. That could have turned ugly." Elena nodded, scratching Rex's ear as he loaded up, the dog's tongue lolling in quiet satisfaction. The evac arrived minutes later, a dust-caked Blackhawk settling with rotors whipping sand into vortices, medics rushing the litter. Debrief in the TOC tent was procedural, under the glow of monitors tracking drone feeds, the air conditioned to a crisp chill. Elena's report was logged, timestamps aligning with SAT confirms, another entry bolstering the unit's vigilance stats. But as the team dispersed to chow, a translator pulled her aside, a wiry local named Karim, his uniform patched from years of service. "Your dog. He saved my brother today," he said in accented English, eyes earnest. The truck. It was his route. Family in the village. Elena paused, the words landing like a salute held too long. "Just the job," she replied, but inside, the ripple widened, her stand not just for the chain, but touching lives woven into the conflict's fabric. Rotation wrapped in winter, the flight home a reverse blur, Bragg's chill greeting them like an old post. Elena's file grew, evals praising her instinctive leadership, but the isolation deepened. Mentoring rookies in spring drills, she watched them bond with pups in the kennel yards, water hoses hissing as they cooled after sessions, yet she kept her stories close, the costs unspoken. Rex, sensing her quiet, pressed closer during evening walks, his warmth against her leg a balm. Home leave coincided with the Texas ceremony that year, her sister's insistence finally wearing through. The high school gym echoed with polished floors and the scent of fresh varnish, banners draping the walls under bright lights. Elena sat in the back row, utilities traded for civilian slacks, Rex retired and waiting at her parents' old farm. Veterans filed in, speeches droning about service's reach, but she shifted uncomfortably, the civilian gaze feeling foreign after years in uniform. As the event wound down, a girl approached, perhaps 12, braids neat, eyes wide with recognition. She clutched a program, hesitating before whispering, "You saved my dad." Eleanor froze, the words pulling threads from distant patrols. The contractor from Anbar, the brother in the village, lives linked by Rex's nose and her resolve. The girl's father, a retired EOD tech, stood behind, nodding gratitude. "Syria, 18, your alert got us clear." The gym's chatter faded, the moment a quiet reckoning, her defiances, once isolated costs, now legacies whispering across years. Elena managed a nod, hand trembling slightly as she shook his. "Team effort," she said, voice steady, but emotion welled in the silence. The girl smiled, the whisper bridging worlds, transforming avoidance into acknowledgement. As she left, the Texas night cool against her skin, Eleanor felt the system's ripples settle, not in reform alone, but in human bonds that outlasted ranks. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Vasquez reach those who still believe in honor. The gymnasium lights hummed softly overhead, casting a warm glow on the polished hardwood floor, where echoes of cheers from long-ago games still seemed to linger. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez stood near the exit, the Texas night pressing against the glass doors, cool and star-pricked after the stuffy confines of the ceremony. Her civilian blouse felt unfamiliar against her skin, unstarched and light, a far cry from the crisp utilities that had defined her for over a decade. Rex waited at home, his retirement years spent in the quiet rhythm of farm life, but his absence tugged at her like an unclipped leash, a reminder of the bonds that had carried her through the stands she'd made. The girl's whisper hung in the air, simple and profound, pulling Elena back to that sun-scorched patrol in Anbar. The father, now in a button-down shirt with rolled sleeves, extended his hand again, his grip firm but weathered. And Callus's, speaking of tools, traded for a desk job stateside. "Name's Ramirez, EOD back in 19. Your team's sweep, that device under the tires, it kept my convoy rolling, got me home to her." He nodded toward the girl, who clutched a small American flag pin, her eyes bright with a mix of shyness and awe. Elena's throat tightened, the moral weight of those deployments shifting from abstract reports to this tangible moment, a life preserved, a family intact. "I didn't know," Elena said, her voice low, measured, the handler's discipline holding back the surge of emotion. Around them, the crowd thinned, veterans exchanging handshakes under the banners, the faint scent of coffee from the refreshment table mingling with the polished wood. Ramirez smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Most don't. But ceremonies like this, they bridge it. You showing up means something." The girl tugged at his sleeve, whispering again, and he chuckled softly. "She saw your photo in the program, handlers from the base. Wanted to say thanks herself." Elena knelt slightly, meeting the girl's gaze at eye level, the gym's acoustics carrying the distant clatter of folding chairs being stacked. "Your dad's a good man. Tough job, keeping everyone safe." The words emerged steady, but inside, the ripples of her service unfurled. From the pipe at Bragg, the crack in the barrel at Lejeune, the buried threat in Syria and Iraq. Each defiance, born of conscience over command, had woven into this civilian thread, touching lives she'd never crossed paths with. The girl pressed the flag pin into Eleanor's palm, cool metal against her skin. "For your dog," she said, voice clear now. "He helped too." Rising, Eleanor pinned it to her collar, the gesture a quiet salute. Ramirez nodded approval. "Heard about your reforms. K9 protocols tighter now, thanks to stands like yours. Saved more than patrols." They parted with a final handshake, the doors swinging open to the parking lot, where fireflies danced in the humid air, the crunch of gravel under Elena's shoes sinking with her measured breaths. Driving back to the farm, the highway unspooling under headlights, she replayed the encounter, not as closure, but as ignition. Avoidance had been her shield, the ceremonies a reminder of vulnerabilities beyond the wire. But this whisper cracked it, revealing the legacy her integrity had built. Dawn broke over the rolling Texas hills the next morning, painting the old farmhouse in soft gold, the air crisp with the scent of dew-kissed grass and distant rain. Elena rose early, as habit demanded, brewing coffee in the chipped pot her father had used, its steam curling like morning mist. Rex stirred from his bed by the window, grey muzzle lifting as she approached, his tail thumping once against the floorboards. She clipped his leash, not for duty, but for the walk that grounded her, and they stepped out, boots and paws marking the dirt path to the pasture fence. The farm had been her anchor during leaves, a place of quiet where the base's hum faded. But now it felt charged, the girl's words echoing in the rustle of oak leaves. Her sister met her in the kitchen upon return, flour dusted from biscuit dough, the oven's warmth battling the chill. "Heard you talk to the Ramirezes last night. Looked like it hit home." Elena poured a second mug, the ceramic warm in her hands, and nodded. "It did. More than I expected." The conversation flowed easily, skirting the years of skipped events, the deployments that had pulled her away. Her sister leaned against the counter, eyes knowing. Dad would have been proud, not just the service, but standing up when it counted. "You're carrying that now." Word of the encounter spread subtly through family channels, then outward. A local paper ran a short piece. "Local hero returns, framing Eleanor's career without the gloss of heroics, just facts." The audits sparked at Bragg, the instructor role at Lackland, the patrols that saved contractors like Ramirez. Invitations followed. VFW talks. School assemblies, but Elena chose selectively, her resolve tempered by the system's lessons. Back at Fort Bragg by month's end, reintegrating into the spring cycle, she found the unit changed. New handlers, fresh from her certifications, saluted with a deference that spoke of mentorship's reach. Major Ellis, now Colonel, his glasses still perched on the same wire frames, pulled her into his office during a routine briefing, the space cluttered with updated manuals bearing her input. "Vasquez, the Ramirez story made the rounds. Brass is citing it in diversity training, moral leadership in the field." His tone was approving, the pen in his hand pausing over a commendation form. Elena stood at ease, Rex at heel, his presence a silent testament. "Sir, it was the team's work, Rex's mostly." Ellis leaned back, the chair creaking. "And yours. That chain you tested? It's stronger now. Protocols evolved because one handler trusted her read." The words landed like a formal after-action, acknowledging the reform her stands had ignited. K9 bonds, now central to decision trees. Conscience woven into command evals, quiet shifts that rippled through divisions. She took on more mentoring that summer, leading workshops in the kennel block under the shade of camouflage netting, the air humming with the splash of water hoses and the sharp barks of young dogs. Ruiz, now a seasoned sergeant with his own partner, assisted, their drills precise. Scent lines through mock debris, alerts reinforced with praise clicks. "Remember the Syria call," she'd say during debriefs, voice even over the notepad scratches. Instinct serves the mission when orders strain. The rookies absorbed it, their nods earnest, the unit's vigilance no longer fractured but fortified. Elena's integrity, a symbol etched into the routine. Retirement loomed on the horizon. Papers in process after 12 years, but the transformation lingered. Rex's health held, his walk slower but steady, mirroring her own shift toward Legacy's quieter front. The farm called stronger now, a place to write the handler's manual she'd outlined in spare moments, sharing the bonds that outlasted deployments. The girl's whisper had bridged the gap, from rigid hierarchies to human ripples, proving that moral strength, once tested in silence, reshaped not just systems, but souls. In the end, Elena Vasquez became more than a handler. She embodied the conscience that held the chain intact, her story a testament to loyalty's quiet power. Epilogue. Under the Texas stars, a single flag pin gleams on a kennel wall, symbol of defiances that echo, binding duty to the lives they unknowingly save. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of She Avoided the School Ceremony for years until a girl whispered, "You saved my dad." See you in the next one.